Now, by now, we've all watched the AOC word salad. She went to the Munich Security Conference, and her clips went viral for all the wrong reasons. I'll show them a bit later. Now, it seemed to me, just based on her performance, that she hadn't prepared at all, but according to reports, she had prepared for months with a coach who's an aide to Bernie Sanders. Now, AOC denies that she's preparing to run for president in 2028, but why the months of coaching if she wasn't planning to run? And I'll emphasize, was planning to run. Now, she's denying now that she was planning to run, but maybe only because she had such a disastrous performance at the conference, and it would be absurd for her to talk about running for president now, after a performance like that. Let's watch.
Would and should the U.S. actually commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China were to move?
I think that this is such a, I think that this is of course a very long-standing policy of the United States. And I think what we are hoping for is that we want to make sure that we never get to that point. And we want to make sure that we are moving in all of our economic, research, and our global positions to avoid any such confrontation and for that question to even arise.
Now, as I watched the clip, it occurred to me that if she had a coherent worldview, she would have breezed through the exam, so to speak, for which she had spent months preparing. Now, AOC opposes authoritarian governments, allegedly. Now, the People's Republic of China is one of the most authoritarian nations in the world, with a single-party state that controls all aspects of politics and civil society, bans religion, and enforces digital surveillance. But AOC waffled on Taiwan security, and it was a page out of Joe Biden's playbook, not intended to embolden the PRC, but unquestionably having that effect. Now, one of the reasons why the U.S. is now helping Japan to build up its weapon systems is to prevent the invasion and annexation of Taiwan. Now, AOC and the Democratic Socialists have a blind spot regarding capitalist nations that are enforcing strong borders, as the new Prime Minister of Japan is doing, Sanai Takaichi. Now, she's a strong ally of President Trump, and her government has a strong interest in keeping the PRC focused on peace and prosperity instead of invasion and annexation. Now, the entire world understands what the task is, but the Democratic Socialists evidently do not. Now, here's AOC talking about the capture of Maduro.
What happened in Venezuela, for example, it is not a it is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state and engage in acts of war just because the nation is below the equator.
Well, like objects in the side view mirror, Venezuela is a lot closer to the U.S. than it appears to Democrats. It's above the equator, and Maduro is a criminal, a drug trafficker and human trafficker who evaded U.S. sanctions and allowed the PRC, Russia, and Iran to establish a presence in this hemisphere. Now, Maduro was a pain point to his own people as well. Now, the government there now is a lot more friendly and working with the U.S. to restore the supply of oil to get Venezuela back on track to being a petrostate with prosperous people and a future. Now, our U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, gave a speech at Munich regarded as the most statesmanlike of the conference. Now, he urged closer ties between the U.S. and Europe based on our shared culture and values. But AOC, in the next clip, the Democrats had sent her out there to debunk Marco Rubio, but she was so invested in the narrative of oppressor and oppressed that that's all she wanted to talk about. Let's watch.
Marco Rubio's speech was a pure appeal to Western culture. My favorite part was when he said that American cowboys came from Spain
I thought they came from Winnetou, but
I believe the Mexicans and descendants of African enslaved peoples would like to have a word.
Now, the Spanish conquistadors brought horses to the Americas, that's a fact. Vaqueros were the first cowboys. There's no question that some of the cowboys were Mexican or descended from enslaved people, but AOC wants to erase the Spanish origins of the vaqueros, even though the language spoken throughout Latin America is Spanish, which is derived from Latin, the language that was spoken in ancient Rome, speaking of shared culture, Western culture. Now, in the next clip, AOC describes what she says culture really is. And what she's describing is, in fact, TikTok, but she says she's describing culture and Western culture. Let's watch.
I think it's also important to note how thin that foundation is. Culture is changing. Culture always changed. Culture for the entire history of human civilization has been a fluid, evolving thing that is a response to the conditions that we live in. And so they want to take this mantle of culture. At the end of the day, though, it is very thin.
But Western culture isn't thin. It originated with the Greeks, whose understanding of politics and government forms part of the foundation of Western culture. Now, the Greeks also contributed their understanding of science, philosophy, literature, art, architecture, language, logic, etc. Now, later, the Greeks influenced the Romans, from whom we received a complex system of laws. Engineering. The Romans invented aqueducts, without which we wouldn't have plumbing, and Judeo-Christian ethics. So the Bible, as well, is integral to Western culture from the time of the Emperor Constantine, at the latest, though probably earlier. Now, the Apostle Paul went to Rome during the time of the Emperor Nero, for example, and the Bible even discusses the census called by the very first emperor, Roman Emperor, Augustus Caesar, during which Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Now, I wouldn't call that foundation thin. Now, I understand that AOC usually keeps her message simple because that's what her audience prefers. But on the world stage, she has to be able to sound learned, and she didn't pull that off. Now, her sound bites might pass muster on TikTok, but not all American voters live and die by TikTok. Now, hopefully the progressives will lose big in the midterms. They won a big off-year election, unfortunately, and it's just a false statement to say that they can manage the government more responsibly or more humanely than anyone else. False statement. Just as an example, 13 homeless people froze to death in New York City this winter as a direct result of Mayor Mamdani rolling back Mayor Adams' policy of forcing homeless people into shelters during cold weather. Now, it seems to me the progressives are the ones whose understanding of the world is thin, very thin. Talk about projection. And here's a final clip of AOC showcasing a word salad about rejecting Western culture and providing for poor people instead. Let's watch.
And so the response that we have to have is, again, it's material, it's class-based, it's common interest. A lot of what we talk about when we talk about a class-based internationalist perspective also means ending the hypocrisy towards the global South.
And with that, she quits making any sense at all. Now, the global South being shut out of the West is why there is a global South. The progressives have no answers. They've never successfully managed anything. Let's remember that for the midterms. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe.